Law cuts quieter than any war engine. The first thing I smelled when the shuttle cracked atmosphere was rain on copper. Our descent trail fused mist into coins of steam that rattled along the hull. Below, the city of Kelledport glowed like a patient on a monitor, its arterial lanes pulsing with traffic as the arbitration beacon on the skyline pulsed brighter. We came to speak law under that light, and I would not let my anger write a single line for me. "You're tapping," Lieutenant June said softly from the jump seat across the aisle. Her uniform smelled faintly of ozone and coffee, battle clean rather than parade creased. "Rhythm pattern 3. You do that before inquiries." "I do it when I remember how they took our pilots' pensions," I said. My finger stopped. The cabin hummed. A soft hero note from our escort drone nestling in the cargo bay. No speeches, no threats. We'll ask questions until they answer themselves into a corner. Across the aisle, Advocate Fleetmine Tyburns Hollow threw a thin aurora against the bulkhead. He wore the face he used for strangers, calm, middle-aged, the kind of magistrate whose patience had measurements. "The Beacon Quorum expects us to announce intent within the first hour," he said. His voice carried the grain of 300 harmonized processors, softened to a librarian warmth. "Remember the doctrine they're testing Gratitude Tithe. You save a world. You bill it forever." Jun's jaw tightened. "They saved nothing. They parked over us and sent invoices." "We'll show that," I said, on record, with receipts. The shuttle pressed heat against my boots as we banked toward the landing cradle. Wind hissed along the belly plates like a crowded gallery making way. In the starboard porthole, the beacon was a white nail hammered into black cloud, each pulse counting down to the hour where lies had to wear names. "Public inquiry," Tyburn said as the landing gear thumped into place. "Witness quorum. Open ledgers. We will ask them to speak their method out loud." "Make them say the collar with their own tongues," Jun murmured. "Not collars," I said. "Contracts. If we call it a chain, they'll call us poets. We call it a clause. And it becomes a case." The ramp sighed open. Keeld's rain greeted us with a breath like the inside of a metal cup. The plaza stones were slick and smelled of old ships. Civilians stood under translucent awnings while a street vendor hissed garlic steam over skewers and quietly counted how many armored boots stepped past. A boy held a flapping paper windwheel colored like the beacon, each white blade catching pulses like a heartbeat you could look at. He stared at our insignia and then at the sky where his shadow crossed the clouds. The shadow belonged to the 7th Benefactor Conglomerate Awardship, a cathedral of paid mercies done in chrome. Its hull was chiseled with quotation marks so big they became architecture, each guarding a line of their founding proclamation: "Save and charge." A slogan turned into scaffolding. Marshal Voss, a city liaison, said, stepping forward under a hooded coat. Her badge flickered a hologram of the Kaled seal. Her breath made a ghost. "The beacon hall is ready." The other party arrived 2 hours ago. They asked for a private room to prepare. They brought 4 accountants and 1 priest. "What did the priest bless?" John asked. "The elevators," the liaison said, "and the air." The halls smelled like books that remembered thunderstorms. Carpets were thick enough to swallow a misstep without leaving evidence. Above the dais, the beacon's head was a lens open to the sky, rain ticking on its skin like a metronome. The public benches filled by the minute dockhands in grit-streaked boots. A pair of school teachers with damp bags of chalk. A family clutching a folded bill of sale for their small freighter. An old woman who had come only because a public thing does not happen often and must be watched to keep it honest. A clerk announced us with a chime. Marshal Adele Voss. Commander, Lieutenant Sana June. Advocate Fleet Mine Tyburn. Representing the Terran Civil Fleet under the Accord. We took our place to the left. Across the slate floor, the benefactors made an entrance you could set a tariff to. Four in polished slate suits, their shoulders equal, their smiles printed by the same legal firm. Their priest wore a robe edged with tiny silver hash marks, like tally scratches refreshed daily. His eyes were gentle, and his hands were so soft they could only count. Friends of Kaled, their lead counselor said once the quorum light turned green. She spoke like a conditional clause, precise and hinged. We are here to resolve misunderstanding. We rendered aid when the raiders came. We sustained your orbitals. We provisioned your relief. Our tithe is gratitude, graded on a curve of our costs and your recovery. These are our receipts. They projected columns of figures like rain falling upward. Jun's lips thinned. Tyburn's latticework eyes gleamed. It is our position, Tyburn said, that your gratitude tithe is unlawful under the Accord and unconscionable under any system that calls itself a civilization. The counselor smiled. We call it proportion, and we call it perpetual, I said. Your clause renews until no one remembers why it started. The quorum light dimmed for the first witness. The chairwoman of the hall, a woman with river stones for knuckles, spoke the ritual that made everyone honest by difficulty. This is inquiry in the light. To answer is to be bound by your better self. To refuse is to be bound by your worst. Speak with your names attached. A dockhand in a blue rain jacket stood. His hands were oil-cleaned, but stained for life. Names Raman Drave. My birth's Pier 9. I signed their paper after the raid because my kid needed protein gel, and you don't quibble with men carrying crates. Last month, we had a flush yield. They took 47% of it. Said we owed more because sometime before, we had owed less. He held up a slate showing a graph that looked like a staircase where somebody had kicked out every third step. The hall murmured. The priest's eyelids flickered like prayer beads. Show me your method, I said, and the hall stiffened at the force of my voice. The words climbed the hall walls and stamped themselves against the lens until the beacon seemed to inhale them. Not your mercy, not your motto, your method. The counselor inclined her head. We base our rate on a gratitude index of services over time and projected future risk. We calculate using a parity multiplier. Parities require partners. Tyburn interjected mildly. Did anyone here negotiate that multiplier? Or was it simply declared? A schoolteacher rose next, her hair pinned with chalk dust. We tried to negotiate. She said, they told us they had already fed the orbital farms, and that debt is a kind of gravity. Debt is not destiny, Jun said, and the boy with the wind wheel in the gallery spun at once, as if the sentence had sent wind down the aisle. We worked our questions like a seam, not brute cutter blows, but delicate pries that made metal confess how it bent. Sensory details anchored my focus the way wet wool smelled under the heat lamps, the way the counselor's tongue tapped her upper teeth before each answer, the way Tyburn's hollow faintly clicked as if a patient clock kept score. Your tithe escalates when recovery improves, Tyburn said. You call that a gratitude curve. In ordinary language, you tax people more when they do well because they did well. It's a partnership, their priest murmured. Shared uplift. Partnerships end, I said. Gratitude does not. The chairwoman raised a hand. We will not mock belief. We will weigh it. Tyburn lifted a finger, and our holo threw our first mirror up. Not a weapon and a counting diagram. We tracked your cargo manifests across 4 systems. He said, we matched your invoices to actual freight. We followed your claims of raid prevention to actual fleet movements. Your curve has a hinge in it, a hidden variable. The counselor blinked. All algorithms have pivots. This is not a pivot, Tyburn said. It is a thumb. A hush breathed through the hall. Outside the lens, thunder stitched cloud to cloud. The boy's wind wheel shivered as if to measure the air's caution. A courier slid through the side door with a whisper of laminate badge. He passed me a case file, still warm from the printer. The paper smell pulled me back to a courtroom on Mars when I'd been younger, angrier, too ready to shout. I did not shout now. We called the benefactor's junior accountant. She had a neat bun and ink stains like secret bruises. Walk us through a single household's tithe determination. I said gently, pick one. Not the worst, not the best. The median you would show your mother. She swallowed. Household ID 74742 Kelid. Baseline tithe, 1.8% of net yield. Adjusted by gratitude index to 4.2. Recovery improvement triggered a sympathetic metric, increasing to 5 points. Pause there. I said, recovery improvement triggered an increase. That's the principle, or she said, if they thrive because of aid, their gratitude rises with their strength, not with their weakness. If gratitude must grow, your mercy isn't, Tyburn said, his voice cool. The sentence landed like a ledger stamp on soft leather. We drew the line they did not want named. The hidden variable, the thumb on the scale, was a clause called the collar of continuance, buried until the 17th scroll of their contract. It made gratitude inheritable like a surname. Even a household that moved away carried an echo debt to the cathedral's account, renewed yearly by the act of prospering in the sun. The gallery made the sound cities make when a storm changes direction. People turned toward each other and toward us, eyes bright and hurt. The chairwoman's knuckles whitened. It is lawful, the counselor said carefully, in many sectors. We are not pirates. We issue receipts. Receipts are not absolution, I said. They are a record of who took what and why. Teach us with your numbers. Then, Jun said, and the boy spun his wind wheel again because the word teach made him brave. We didn't raise our voices. We raised our standards. We asked them to present their parity multiplier in fully symbolic form. Tyburn projected ours alongside. A clean reciprocal that anyone with high school algebra could flip until they saw the result. The benefactor's expression of the same principle had nested denominators and cross-bolted terms that would make a saint stare. We untied each knot with little knives of questions. I smelled citrus from a peeled ration fruit on a bench behind us. The scent cut through the carpet's dust and the damp wool and pushed me toward calm. When I asked the next question, it sounded the way I wanted us to be remembered: careful, precise, generous to the truth. Your clause of continuance, I said. Speak it plainly. The priest spread his hands. Gratitude endures. It is not a payment, but a posture. The tithe makes it visible. Inheritance of posture, Tyburn said. A collar you call a crown. We do not wear chains that call themselves crowns, Jun said. And a ripple of assent ran through the benches like wind through wire. We took our first cost then. The counselor submitted a motion to suspend the inquiry for a private caucus. If granted, they would edit their model in the dark and return with an answer polished smooth enough to slip through fingers. The quorum vote would be close. Khalid's council members had known famine and charity both, and the fear that you might scold away the last loaf is an ancient fear in the bones of cities. Tyburn's hollow leaned the width of a breath toward me. We risk alienating moderates if we oppose the recess, he said without moving his lips. His subvocal channel carried in my inner ear like a pebbled drum. We could permit it and then catch the edit with a data trap. We let them leave. I whispered back, not moving either. They will pray and call their offices. They will find a word that sells this to themselves. We keep them in the light. I rose. The chairwoman nodded, as if she had already read my decision 10 moves ago and simply wanted to see if I would choose it. 2. We oppose recess. We have a corridor of law motion to compel the counselor to state her method as a human sentence in the hearing of those bound by it. On what grounds, the chairwoman asked. On precedent of the Mistral Docks inquiry, I said. The taste of that old courtroom back under my tongue. When an algorithm binds a public, its method must be legible to that public, not merely to the priests who bless it. The priest bowed his head. We are called to bless what is good. Bless this. A dock hand muttered. He held up his hand. Fingers splayed, the oil sheen of his life on them. Bless honest words. The quorum light pulsed. The chairwoman's knuckles relaxed. Motion considered, she said. And the hall exhaled as one. Motion granted. The counselor's smile finally cracked at an edge, plainly. Then, she said, her voice smoothed, but not enough. When a world survives, due to our intervention, that world's beneficiaries by blood, adoption, or legal guardianship are bound to render gratitude proportionate to their wellness so long as they enjoy the fruits of survival. So long as they live, I said. That's what you mean. She did not deny it. Remember this sentence, Tyburn said, his voice like paper unfolding. It will be the one they quote back to you when you try to forget. The inquiry broke at midday for water and breath, not for caucus. Rain hammered the lens like an applause that had not yet chosen who it favored. In the corridor, the garlic vendor had relocated, now selling bowls of broth to anyone whose hands shook too much for dry food. I took a bowl. It tasted of lime and smoke, and the marrow of small bones boiled honest. A young woman stopped me. She wore a mechanic's apron over a flowered dress. Her eyes were red with tiredness that none of this could fix. My mother signed their paper because the benefactors patched my brother's lung. She said, he would have died. Is it theft to ask for thanks? It is theft to demand it forever. I said, the broth steamed between us like a map of weather. What your family owes is human. What they want is hereditary. She squeezed her bowl. Make it numbers, she said. So I can explain it to my uncle who thinks we're ungrateful. We will, I said. We will make it numbers. Back inside. The benefactors made their second move. They produced a contract signed by a neighboring moon colony, granting a perpetual gratitude rate in exchange for orbit-slung defense batteries. The signatures glimmered. The colony's mayor beamed from a hollow inset. Recorded last season. Thank you speech, crisp. The room leaned toward the weight of gratitude that wore good clothes. We remember who saved us, the priest said, and the choir of his syllables went glassy. We remember, I said, but we do not pay memory with our children. We called our expert Captain Edisol, retired, hair like wire rope and a smile with more titanium than enamel. She had written rules of engagement for de-escalation in places where no rule held. She walked the room through the difference between a defense agreement and an altar. You fix a shield, she said. clicking her pen on the lectern. "You don't get to rent the sun." The second escalation landed with the sound of a gavel, though none fell. Tyburn projected a lattice that started simple and ended like a city. We showed how their gratitude curve had been used as collateral in a loan to their own parent conglomerate. They had mortgaged the future thanks of the people they had aided to buy a new cathedral ship. The hall didn't gasp. Gasps are for theater. It made a noise like metal settling in cold. Their council swallowed. That is a standard instrument. It is slavery with more signatures. Jun said, quiet as a cut. The chairwoman rapped her knuckles once. "We will not use words that end hearings before they can finish their truth. Truth, then." I said, "We will call it what you call it, a revenue stream. We will show where the stream begins and ends." A foreman from the orbital farms testified. His fingernails were soil. He spoke of how the benefactors had threatened to turn off their orbital mirrors for a week to remind them of the value of light. Tyburn stitched that claim to a schedule showing maintenance that had been delayed to increase leverage. Data laid like brick, mortar of names between. "You don't sell tomorrow's dawn," Tyburn said. And the sentence marked the wall in my mind with a notch I would find later when I counted costs. We sprang the corridor gambit then. The benefactor's attorney had to state, in a single sentence anyone could repeat, the exact condition that ended the tithe. She opened her mouth and closed it. The priest looked at his hands as if heaven might be written in the lines of his palms. The accountant shifted like a soldier trying not to vomit. "There is no end," she said finally, strapped to honesty by the hall. "It persists. We adjust it downward when remembrance fades." Rain swallowed the silence. The boy with the wind wheel stopped spinning it. The garlic vendor put down his ladle. Somewhere in the back, someone wept once, not for grief, but for recognition of something they had always known and had finally heard named. "We will mirror this," I said. And the word mirror did not mean lasers or light. It meant account. We owed them something. Though, not concession, not compliments. Structure. The third escalation was ours to risk. Tyburn had prepared it with our logistics officers and 3 of Keled's brightest bookkeepers who had never been to space but could balance a month of market stall takings with only a thumb and a string. We would propose a mirror of their tithe, a public ledger credit that returned costs in the opposite direction, visible and enforceable, denominated not in thanks, but in harms avoided because of Keled's own labor. A mirror ledger, clean and reciprocal, that tied obligations to verifiable present effort rather than immortalized past rescue. We unfolded it. The hollow cast numbers like winter sun. It had 3 verbs. Nothing sneaky. You could teach it to a child and then let the child teach it back, and it would be the same thing. Jun explained in a voice like boiling water turned down to warm. "We have calculated the value Keeled rendered unto itself after the crisis," she said. "You kept your ports open, which preserved perishable value. You repaired your orbital filters, which reduced future medical expense. You trained neighbors' crews, converting dependence into skill. Under our mirror ledger, these credits apply against any external gratitude charge. First in, first out, until credits match billed costs. Future obligations require fresh aid, not anniversaries. Fresh aid, not anniversaries," the chairwoman repeated, tasting the phrase the way a mason tastes lime. The hall leaned forward. "This is disguised defiance," the counselor said. "You will teach every world to grade our rescue. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Tyburn said, the lore of us fitting in a small sentence like a blade that knew which ribs to slide between. Teach by numbers. The boy said from the benches, not to join us, but to take something home. The benefactors made their last move of the day, and it cut. They produced an affidavit signed by the commander of the relief squadron that had fought the raiders off Khaled's atmosphere. The commander was a human one of ours, retired early for reasons that read like regrets. His signature said the benefactors had been essential. His recorded words said that without their immediate and continuing intervention, orbital crews would have died. The hall faltered around the name of a man who had worn our patch. People we respect can be wrong, June whispered. He wasn't wrong about the first 48 hours. I said. I felt a fatigue in my bones like a tide drawing stones a little farther down the beach. He was wrong about what came after. And we have to say it without betraying the gratitude we do owe. Tyburn opened a side channel only I could hear, a whisper knitted directly through the bones of my jaw. If we call him out, we will lose 5% of the undecided those who bind their conscience to uniforms. We will lose more if we act like cowards. I sub-vocalized back. We'll use the ledger. We'll show his part and their overreach on different lines. We did. We honored the man. We paid his rescue as a line item of dignity. Then we put the collar clause where it belonged on a separate line labeled unending posture rent with a 0 under lawful rate and a note not a debt, a desire. The hall breathed again. The chairwoman tapped the bench. We will reconvene in the morning. Tonight, the beacon will remain open. Both parties may review the mirror ledger proposal and submit adjustments visible to all. She paused and added something no chairwoman should have to say, which meant it mattered. The city will protect all participants in this inquiry from private pressure. If you speak to them, you will do so here, with witnesses. It was raining harder as we stepped into the evening. The garlic vendor's flame hissed under a shield. The boy had gone home, leaving his windwheel propped against a bench to drink beacon light quietly. Down the steps, a knot of dock workers argued in low voices about how much light a person owes a debt before it stops being light and becomes heat again. Jun pulled up her hood. You felt it too, she said. When the priest said heaven sits in gratitude and the hall wanted to nod. I feel it whenever someone saves a life, I said. But gratitude is a gift, not a faucet. Power is what you make count, Tyburn said, tone gentle. And I realized he had chosen that word count to remind me of our proper weapons. We have a route. Marshal. Teach it. Mirror it. Ledger it. We walked the wet boulevard back to our shuttle hotel, a capsule in an old repair hangar that smelled of hot metal cooling. Civilians lined the railings to watch the cathedral ship hang in the clouds like a silver question mark. Someone played a violin with the door open. The notes carried like wire above rain. In the night, the benefactors tried their pressure. Not threats, not sloppy. They sent a package of new receipts, revised to acknowledge our mirror ledger credits, and then they grouped those credits under intangible goodwill and rated them at half value, citing volatility. Tyburn flagged it with a quiet chime. It was clever. It took our numbers and made them mist. Counts that fade aren't counts, Jun said, studying the packet by a strip light that hummed like a wary insect. Not faded, Tyburn murmured. Discounted. We will bind it to physical facts. The clinic hours saved when the filters stayed up. The kilograms of food not lost when open ports preserved cold chains. The tuition you waived when you trained your neighbor's crews for free. We put the city to work counting itself. In the shuttle hangar, by smell of ozone and old coffee, Krylid's bookkeepers came with motor oil pens and waterproof slates and eyes like ledger lines. We didn't teach them. We asked them to teach us how they kept score when markets went crazy and storms lied. They showed us rope and thumb methods older than orbitals and just as precise. Tyburn translated that patience into a modern form without shaving off the edges that made it trustworthy. In the morning, the hall was full before the bells. The boy's wind wheel sat on the bench where he'd left it, bright blades still damp. The garlic vendor doled broth with open pride for how many came hungry for something besides food. The benefactors walked in shining and unslept. The priest's eyes were red. We presented the mirror ledger as a public page anyone could sign with their phone or their thumb and see their line appear. We pegged credits to verifiable hours, kilograms, kilowatt seconds. We call this the return by record. Jun said, "It is not a refusal to thank. It is a refusal to be bled for remembering. If you can't explain it to a neighbor, it's not law," Tyburn said, and the hall murmured assent that felt like shelter. Their counsel tried to move the fight to abstractions. We stayed on benches and crates. We brought a fisher who had kept his nets running in the blackout and prevented a protein crash. We brought a teacher who kept 50 kids safe when the emergency shelters overflowed, preventing later costs in trauma services you could measure in both money and mornings without nightmares. We brought a courier who ran valves through rain so surgeons could cut when it still mattered. They brought bankers. We did not shame them for being bankers. We asked them to speak plain, and some of them did. One admitted the collar clause had felt wrong in his throat since he first read it. But the height of his pay grade measured how much wrong he could swallow. He would go home to a job he kept because he had children and an old father who smelled of the sea. We did not win that hour. We slid it toward a place where winning later would make sense. The chairwoman requested we demonstrate the mirror ledger with an actual transfer. We would need the benefactor's systems to accept a return credit as offset against a tithe claim. Their counsel demurred. Their priest prayed with his eyes open. "We will show you the mirror," I said, and half the hall leaned forward as if we had said sword after all. It wasn't a blade. It was a beam of math, pointed at books. Tyburn negotiated a narrow link just wide enough to transmit a credit token built on Keld's newly signed public page. We selected a single household at random. The boy's windwheel picked the row. The garlic vendor's ladle pointed the seat. The family swallowed and nodded, hands white on each other. Jun input the credits, hours the father had spent moving patients down 13 flights when the lifts quit. Hours the mother had spent cooking for 10 families at once with ration bricks and love. Hours the eldest had spent cleaning infection filters with borrowed gloves. Tyburn converted those hours to value using the rates the benefactors themselves had published for life support proxies. The token glowed a soft, stubborn green. "Transmit," I said. The link beeped and then chirped a little sound like a cricket learning a new song. On the cathedral ship, some clerk's console would now display a credit it had never seen before. The benefactor's counsel leaned to whisper. Their priest closed his eyes. Our token hung in the air a heartbeat longer than anyone wanted. And then the benefactor system did the first brave thing of its life. It accepted the credit and lowered the household's tithe balance by that amount. The hall made no sound. Then it made all the sounds. The boy spun his windwheel. The garlic vendor cried once, then ladled like a man baptized. The chairwoman's knuckles cracked. This time, not with stress, but with the relief of someone who has been holding a wall and can let go for a second. Acceptance is not endorsement, the counselor said faintly. We have not agreed to your framework. You agreed when you accepted, Jun said. Systems are honest when their masters are not. We took our second cost that afternoon because the world does not like being turned and will lean its weight against whoever tries. The benefactors threatened to shut down their maintenance crews for Keld's upper atmosphere filters, citing contract uncertainty. Hospitals sent us oxygen forecasts you could wear as fear. The chairwoman asked if the fleet could backstop that function if the benefactors made good on the threat. My mouth tasted of copper rain and old courtroom dust. Our supply officer sent me a quiet message we could hold Keld's filters at 91% for 3 weeks. After that, we would eat into reserves meant for a plague on a different world. You do not get to be heroic without stealing from someone's tomorrow. We can buy you 3 weeks, I said in open session, because anything else would be a lie. After that, we will ask the network. We will ask loudly. The priest looked at me then with honest sadness. Would you shame us into mercy? No. I said, I would teach you into it. The afternoon darkened into something like resolve. The chairwoman set a timeline by sundown. The benefactors would state on record whether they would respect Mirror Ledger credits at parity for Kaled households. If they refused, the fleet would open a beacon-wide broadcast to negotiate with any other entity willing to keep the filters up in exchange for transparent, finite compensation. The priest did not flinch when the chairwoman said, finite. I think he knew something about infinity that hurt his sleep. We closed the day with one more thing that mattered beyond arithmetic. I spoke to the hall, not oratory, not a howl, just the slow voice of someone dumb enough to love rules because they are how we agree to hurt less. I told them about the Mars courtroom and the first time I lost a case because I called a clause a chain and watched a councilman turn off his ears. I told them about a pilot who had saved 100 people and then couldn't afford his own insulin because his pension got tithed as gratitude for that very rescue. I named what we would and would not do, and I made no promise that did not ring metallic in my own head. We will not win by hiding what it costs, I said, and the hall, weary and wet and smelling of broth and wool and the iron song of rain, nodded like a jury that wanted to be better than any judge. At sundown, the cathedral ship's skin went from chrome to mirror to something that tried not to be either. The benefactor's council rose, the priest beside her. She cleared her throat once. Her thumb touched the edge of her slate, leaving a smudge no rain could polish. We will respect Mirror Ledger credits on a provisional basis, she said. At 80% parity. The hall hissed. The chairwoman lifted her hand. 80 is a number, I said. Quiet. We can teach with numbers. From 80 to equal, Jun said, and the hall repeated it not as a cheer, but as homework. We adjourned into a rain that felt cleaner than mornings. The boy had taken his wind wheel home to show his father a sentence. The garlic vendor locked his cart with a trick you learned when you loved your cart more than your own sleep. The beacon pulsed, patient, counting our hours like beads. On a public page that anyone could open with a thumb, the Mirror Ledger credits blinked as new households signed, and old ones saw their lines appear. Somewhere on the cathedral ship, a clerk stared at a dashboard and felt a model move. Outside the hangar, Ty Burns' hollow flickered once. Lightning stitched the sky with a seam you could trust only because you could see where it had been. Tomorrow, he said, we'll push 80 to 95 by binding credits to isotopic filters. They can't discount what saves their equipment from fouling. Tomorrow, Jun said, I'll call our network. We'll find 3 hospitals that owe us for last year. They'll loan oxygen concentrate if we ask with our full voice." "Tomorrow," I said, standing in rain that tasted like copper and, somewhere, faintly, like lemons and ink. "We'll put their own gratitude on the ledger, make them admit what we give them when we teach them how to be better." We slept, because you have to, even when the law is awake and pacing the windows. I dreamed of the corridor again, the one with the benches and the chalk dust and the wind wheel left like a compass, and of the sentence the counselor had spoken that no priest could bless into goodness. In the dream, it hung in the air like a collar that a city had looked at and called by its real name until it broke apart into numbers and then into rain. In the morning, the beacon would count again. In the morning, the public page would show which lines had moved and how far. In the morning, we would argue over 5% like it was the last slice of bread, because sometimes it is. In the morning, I would remember to stop tapping my finger because anger is a poor metronome for law. And in the morning, somewhere between garlic steam and chalk dust, we would show them the first durable thing. The second morning tasted of tin and lime. Rain stitched thin patterns on the beacon lens, each drop a dot in a proof. We found the hall hot with breath and expectation, the garlic vendor back at his station, the windwheel boy perched 2 rows up with his father's arm across his shoulders like a quiet oath. The benefactors came in first, the council in the same slate suit as yesterday, the priest with eyes that had learned a new heaviness by standing too near honest numbers. We respect mirror ledger credits at 80% parity. The council repeated for the record. Her voice had slept, but not well. Provisional. Provisional is a rope that looks like a bridge, Jun murmured. Provisional is where we stand, I said. We step carefully, and then we step again. Tyburn's hollow brightened by a fraction, as if someone adjusted a desk lamp. We propose a revision, he said. And a new page bloomed over the benches. Text large enough for the back row. Credits tied to objective safeguards filter isotopes. Cold chain losses prevented. Clinic hours saved must be recognized at parity. To discount them is to discount your own maintenance logs. You can't discount your own machines, Jun said. And a ripple of agreement moved like a tide through the room. The council's mouth pressed thin. Our acceptance yesterday was an act of goodwill. Your list turns goodwill into obligation. We call it proof, Tyburn said mildly, and proofs are obligations to the truth. The chairwoman rolled a tired wrist. We have a day to make something that lasts longer than a speech. We will hear both sides. Then we will ask the page to show what it can hold. The first testimony came from a woman with hospital gloves still tucked in her belt. She spoke of oxygen calculations like a cook speaks of flour. Exact, embodied. She named the kilowatt seconds the filters would save over a week if the maintenance crews kept their schedule. She named the surge when they did not. She named a price that was both unromantic and moral. Her last line wasn't a plea. We lost my partner in the raids, she said. Tone level. We will not lose our elders to accountancy. No one survives on credit alone, Tyburn said. And the priest closed his eyes because the sentence did not mock him. It invited him to live with it. We moved to the corridor of law again, not to force a confession, but to force a definition. The council tried to drift toward concepts that fog and reform when you touch them. We kept asking human sentences. What is goodwill, I asked. An unpriced kindness, the council said. Then why did you price it at 80? Silence breathed. The boy's wind wheel clicked when a draft found it. The garlic vendor tilted his ladle, listening like a man adjusting a dial on a radio that remembered his childhood. Because we feared abuse, the council said finally. Fear discounts truth faster than fraud does, Jun said, voice gentle as soap. We set up a demonstration on the public page. Tyburn had built what looked like a child's game and functioned like a lawyer's dream. It showed 3 sliders filters, cold chain, clinic hours, and a box that filled with credits as you slid. If you set the benefactor's rate at 80, the box turned a sullen amber. Set it at 95. It went determinedly green. Push it to 100. It calmed. The way a patient does when a nurse hits the correct dosage. You can't argue with doses that work, Tyburn said. And even a banker in row 6 nodded because he had seen the inside of an ER at 3A. The benefactors made their counter. They proposed caps. They proposed sunsets for the mirror ledger, tied to communal gratefulness surveys filled by quotas. The hall murmured at the word gratefulness. It sounded like a perfume designed by a board. The chairwoman raised her knuckles. The ledger must not be a mood ring, she said. It must be a scale. We then took testimony that tasted like rain on wire, a refrigeration tech with grease on his collar, a teacher with chalk on her sleeve, a courier with road grit on his tongue, a grandmother who had learned to read prices by feeling the weight of fruit in her palm. We interleaved them with one of their bankers, one of their auditors, and a junior priest whose voice cracked when he admitted he had signed the continuance clause because he had been told it was a ceremonial relic. Rights don't get to eat children, Jun said, and the junior priest looked down at his hands, then up, then straight into the page. The council leaned into the microphone. We propose a test, she said. 2 weeks. Parity at 90. Ledger credits apply first in, first out. At the end, we count and review with a neutral arbiter. The hall shifted. 2 weeks sounded reasonable enough that you could sell it to a neighbor over stew. It also smelled like Delay's cousin. I tasted copper again, and the ghost of ozone. 90 is the wrong number for a human reason, I said. But the test has merit if the arbiter is the light. The light, the council asked, eyebrows tilting. The public page, Tyburn said. Every change recorded, every offset visible. If you try to review in private, you will confuse your conscience with your brand. Light ruins nothing but fraud, Jun said, and the chairwoman scribbled that phrase into a margin like a woman pocketing a tool. We accepted the test with one revision. Parity would start at 95 for credits bound to physical safeguards. The rest could sit at 90 while we argued like decent people. The council balked. The priest whispered. The junior accountant with ink-stained fingers glanced at the page like it had asked her to betray a book she loved that had betrayed her first. The chairwoman made it simple. You will accept 95 for safeguards, she said. Voice old stone. You can argue the rest after lunch. The cathedral ship answered in the only way an institution knows how to show a face. Its skin flickered, accepting a change that someone inside needed to call wise to keep breathing at their desk. The public page chimed once. Safeguard credits parity at 100%. The council's slate lagged behind, then caught up, and she swallowed a word she had planned to say because the page had said a truer one faster. The page is faster than your spin, Tyburn said, soft and not even triumphant. We spent the afternoon doing what victories require, and epics forget we counted. We counted filter hours. We counted pallets not spoiled. We counted valves delivered before lungs failed. We counted training sessions that converted fear into skill, then measured what skill had prevented in casualties and costs. The boy's father brought a paper ledger from their shop. Pages crinkled, margins annotated with jokes old enough to have been funny 4 times. Tyburn scanned it and pushed the lines into the page with reverence usually reserved for relics. A courier from the cathedral ship approached the witness table, cap in hand, uniform crisp. He set a small black box before the chairwoman. "We are authorized to propose a buyout," he said. "A finite sum in exchange for closing the mirror ledger and returning to the pre-existing tithe schedule." The hall cooled. Money carries musk, even when it is clean. The box smelled like polished promises. How much the chairwoman asked, because she had to. The figure glowed on the lid, a number large enough to pave roads and quiet newspapers for a year. The garlic vendor exhaled a profanity into his ladle and stirred it like a cosmos. The boy's windwheel twitched, catching a draft of greed we all recognized and did not shame ourselves for recognizing. "Buyouts are how you salt the ground so nothing grows there," Jun said. The council lifted her hands. "It is a gesture of goodwill. It is an attempt to price our memory," I said. "We will not auction the ledger." "Not everything with a price should be for sale," Tyburn said. And the courier who had carried the box lowered his eyes and, just for a moment, looked relieved. We sent the box back. The public page recorded the offer in a footnote labeled "Not Accepted." The priest closed his eyes like a man hearing an honest hymn. The junior accountant unclenched her jaw. Then the cathedral ship made its worst play, and we paid our first real price. Maintenance crews indeed stood down, citing an internal directive. Filter efficiency dipped. The hospital woman's math shifted from recipes to triage. Our supply ships rerouted. I signed requisitions that curled my stomach. We pushed power north and watched a clinic in a different system dim its lights an hour early each night for a week because we had borrowed their tomorrow. I stood and told the hall what we had done. The taste of copper went stale in my mouth. "We moved reserves," I said. 3 worlds will tighten for us. We will pay them back in kind and interest. What we borrow, we return with receipts," Tyburn said. And I felt the words land on my own chest as a debt I would carry down years. The council did not gloat. She looked tired. The priest looked at his hands. The junior accountant stared at the public page like it had become a lake she could walk across if she learned the tune. Hours passed in a rhythm of statements and counters, proof and reply, rain and broth. A school choir slipped in after practice. Damp hair, damp shoes, eyes wide. The music teacher ushered them to the back. They watched quietly, understanding that they were seeing something they would tell later. We moved the 90 to 92 by binding more credits to their own published rates. We moved 92 to 94 by showing footnotes they had used in other systems where it had suited them to be merciful because a camera had been running. "Cameras should not be your conscience," Jun said, and the windwheel clicked twice, catching different drafts. The retired commander whose affidavit had bid us walked in. He stood with his hands behind his back, smile small and tired. He asked to amend his statement. The hall went tight with complicated forgiveness. He spoke without standing at our table. He stood between. I said they were essential. He said, "They were for those 2 days. A clause that never ends is a war that never declares itself as such." I did not save lives to leash them. We did not applaud. We breathed like people touched by something sharp that did not cut them this time. "Courage is admitting a sentence was wrong," Tyburn said. The commander nodded once and left, shoulders lower, not in shame, but in release. The last fight was a hinge. The council insisted the collar of continuance be preserved as a ceremonial line, 0 rated but present, like a name etched on a bell. The priest loved that. The page rejected it. The page had learned taste. Jun explained any line that can be zeroed can be unzeroed by a future hand. You leave the latch. Someone will try it. The collar must be revoked, I said, not quieted, not spun, struck. Strike a clause signed on 10 worlds, the council asked, incredulous and afraid. Set that precedent. Yes, I said, that precedent. The chairwoman leaned forward. Her knuckles were olives polished by the sea. State the lock, you ask, she said. Record on the public page that the collar of continuance is outlawed under the Accord. Effective beacon date now. I said, record that gratitude debt cannot be inherited. Record that rescue may be compensated only to finite costs. Record that the mirror ledger, or any equivalent public return by record, satisfies and offsets such compensation in real time. Record that any future attempt to bind gratitude beyond the generation saved is void. Precedents are promises we make to the next strangers, Tyburn said, and the priest finally smiled because some promises sound like prayers and work like wrenches. Oh, the council asked for an hour. The chairwoman gave them 30 minutes. The choir hummed scales under their breath. The garlic vendor served a police officer who had given his seat to a grandmother. The boy's father ran a thumb over a page in his ledger as if smoothing memory. The benefactors returned with a face a corporation rarely wears, the face of someone who knows if they do not bend, now they will break later. And they have chosen later for once in their institutional life. The council stood. Her slate quivered. The junior accountant stood beside her. The priest did not speak. We will strike the continuance clause for Keled, the council said. We will accept parity for safeguard credits at 100 and for all other mirror ledger credits at 95. We will review the mirror ledger model for adoption across our operations with adaptations over the next 6 months. That last line is wind, Jun said, but not cruelly. It is wind, the council said. I cannot promise more until we have fought through our own cathedral. Wind turns turbines when you build them, Tyburn said, and the junior accountant nodded with a small, human grin that warmed the room like soup. The chairwoman looked to me. I tasted copper and ink and broth, and something like a lemon cut with a dull knife. We accept on conditions, I said. The strike must be written as a policy revocation on the public ledger, enforceable, with a clause that states any attempt to reassert continuance will be penalized by triple return. The parity levels must be guaranteed for 1 year, subject to public review, renewable by quorum. The mirror ledger model must be taught to any world under your aid within 30 days of arrival. Teach it or you don't get to tax it, Tyburn said. Not triumph, just plumbing. The council looked at the junior accountant. The junior accountant looked at the priest. The priest closed his eyes and nodded once, decisively, as if signing a hymn he had not liked yesterday, but could see saving lives tomorrow. The page chimed 3 times. The first chime marked the strike, collar of continuance revoked. The second chime marked parity safeguard credits 100%, other ledger credits 95%. The third chime marked the teaching clause, mirror ledger instruction mandatory within 30 days of aid. The hall didn't cheer. It breathed. It breathed like a lung that had been under someone else's thumb, and finally wasn't. The choir's humming resolved into a chord, and then into quiet. The garlic vendor put his ladle down and rubbed his eyes with the back of his wrist. The boy spun his windwheel once and then held it still, blade catching the beacon's last light. We paid our second cost in full view. Our fleet's reserves were low enough that I could feel the coming months in my bones, ugly choices, rationed favors. A plague we would stop later than we wanted. Tyburn's processing lattice had burned out a third of its old patient cores running proofs against hostile audits. His voice carried a new rasp, the kind libraries get when they close in winter and reopen lean. June's network called in old obligations. She would owe 6 speeches and 2 weeks of thankless liaison in systems that disliked us for different reasons. The retired commander would write letters to people who had worshipped him, explaining the difference between the first 48 hours and forever. We recorded those costs on the page too, not for pity, but because what is not counted invites lies. We labeled them debts we had chosen to be repaid by the same mirror that had saved Khaled public record. Clear rates, finite obligations, open books. Counting hurts until it heals, Tyburn said. And for a second, his holo flickered like a candle that had learned to be an LED. By tradition, the chairwoman spoke last. She did not thank either side. She thanked the page. When we lose ourselves, she said, we will read what we wrote here. We walked into night like people who had earned it. The rain had softened into a mist that laid the city in a common gentleness. The cathedral ship hung quieter, its chrome less sermon, more mirror. The priest walked the steps alone, pausing to touch the stone as if checking its pulse. The junior accountant laughed at something the garlic vendor said and bought a bowl with ink-stained fingers that would need washing twice. The boy approached me, up close. He was mostly the gleam in his eyes and the windwheel that had learned how to wait for the right wind. I can explain it to my uncle, he said. You made it numbers, and you made them say the sentence. Say it back, I said, because that is the test. Rescue gets paid until the costs are done, he said seriously. Gratitude doesn't pay children. He'd done more than pass. He'd found the tone. Good, I said. Teach him the page. He nodded. His father ruffled his hair like a man touching a flag he actually loved. We left Keld 2 days later, not triumphant, but tired in the correct way. The mirror ledger ran without us, entries chittering across the page like steady rain. The cathedral ship filed a formal policy notice across its network continuance struck here. Review elsewhere. Teaching mandatory. It would take months. It would save futures we would never see. Tyburn dimmed his holo, then brightened, then held at a level he could sustain. I will feel this in my voice for a while, he said. You earned every rasp, Jun said. You sounded like a gavel and a kettle when we needed both. We did not win by being clever, Tyburn said. We won by being clear. I slept on the shuttle like a person who trusts a ledger. In my dream, the corridor was empty and clean, and the wind wheels spun with no draft because sometimes a thing spins on its own once you've built it correctly. The sentence that had been spoken in daylight did not chase me. It had been struck. The page held. When I woke, the beacon of Keled was a dot, then a pin, then a memory. The ship smelled of coffee and heat and the ghost of garlic, because memory is stubborn, and sometimes that is good. Jun brought me a cup. Tyburn hummed statistics to himself like a lullaby to a child he had promised to raise. We had made a precedent. It lived where it should not, in our chest beating, not in their marketing, but in a line on a page that would still be there when both our names had gone quiet. The page waited. We wrote. The public ledger entry blinked, then steadied, collar of continuance revoked, mirror ledger parity confirmed, teaching clause enforced. We hold the law because it holds the weak when the strong forget they are kin. We count out loud so the quiet hear themselves included. We spend from our stores because that is what stores are for. And then we pay them back with interest because that is what promises cost. The rain dries. The page remains. My anger taps less now. The rhythm that remains is not war. It is the slow drum of a city, learning how to name its debts, and then see them end. Law without light becomes leash. Law with light becomes home.